and gentlemen, in the red corner, hailing from the state of Nevada, representing the Steam and Wise Guys, it's the always feared Vegas Odds Maker! And in the blue corner, the crowd favorite from South Florida, Mark Winning Picks Lawrence! And now, let's get it on!
Against the spread, Winning Picks with Mark Lawrence.
Hi, everybody. Mark Lawrence once again as we're going against the spread on this week's NFL football playoff card, along with our co-host Victor King from King Creole Sports, welcoming you to the show. And Victor, I'm going to welcome you to the show as well. I know that you're into the NFL playoffs knee-deep, also doing a lot of basketball work in the database. Anything that caught your eye from the NFL football playoffs last week, Victor?
Well, absolutely. Before we do get into the numbers, Mark, from last week, we got to congratulate the main man with a really nice weekend in the wild card round of the NFL playoffs. Let's see, for Mark Lawrence, it was a 3-star play on Saturday on the Jacksonville Jaguars, a game that looked pretty bad for a long time there. An incredible second-half comeback by the Jaguars. My wife's son drove up to Jacksonville with his cousins and went to the game and really had a fantastic time. A super second-half comeback by the Jaguars, the first team to win a playoff game in NFL history with, I believe, a -5 or worse turnover record. So nicely done with the Jaguars there on Saturday. And then, of course, Mark came right back on Sunday with that 4-star wild card game of the year on the Baltimore Ravens, plus the 7 and a hook in that particular game. And nicely done. They lost by 7. They covered the point spread for the Baltimore Ravens. Mark, a game perhaps that they even perhaps should have won the game. Granted, they covered the point spread, but they outstatted Cincinnati by over 100 yards in that game. And the only way Cincinnati won was with a 98-yard scoop and score in the fourth quarter of that game.
Yeah, in fact, Victor, that game itself, Cincinnati scored 14 points directly off turnovers. Very, very beneficial were they to the turnover aspect of it. And we called this out, I believe, in this week's Playbook Playoff Guide newsletter. And if I didn't, I might have done it in the coffee club. And if I didn't do it there, I'm going to do it here, okay? What I found is, and I love, as you know, Victor, the midweek alert, the stat logs, and you tear them down, you break them up, and you move them around every which way but loose. And when you analyze the Cincinnati Bengals, and we hit on it a little bit in this week's newsletter, we mentioned in there inside the stats, okay, against other bowl teams, okay, they reek. They're terrible. Okay, I believe 1-6 to the in the stats. They only won the stats one time against other playoff teams. They have now lost the yardage 3 straight games against fellow playoff teams by over 100 yards each of their last 3 football games. What I'm saying here, what I'm trying to allude to here is they have holes, okay, Cincinnati does. And compounding their problems this week is they've only got 2 starting offensive linemen that are in the lineup this week that are amongst the regulars. They lost another lineman last week. So as good as Cincinnati's been on this major winning run, that's one of the reasons we attacked them last week with Baltimore. We saw those phony stats, and we loved the Baltimore defense. We thought Baltimore could run the football on them. Like I say, the football team has problems. So remember that moving forward about the Cincinnati Bengals, I do not see this team making the Super Bowl this year. What's your take on the Cincinnati Bengals, Victor?
I'm with you on that one, and it looks like there is some money coming in midweek here on the Buffalo Bills, who opened up, about a 3.5-point home favorite and are currently up to -5. There's even some 5.5s out there as we speak. For those keeping score at home, Mark, here are the results from the wild card weekend. Favorites went 4-2 straight up, but only 2-4 against the spread, with the, of course, Niners being the only big favorite that covered, of course, that Saturday afternoon game against Seattle. Home teams also went 4-2, 2-4 ATS against the spread. The teams that covered being, of course, again, the 49ers and the Jaguars, both of the Saturday games. But more than anything else, the surprising thing for me, Mark, was the fact that overs went 5-1 on wild card weekend. 5 overs, only one game under the total. That game that did go under the total did by only a half a point. The Monday night game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Dallas Cowboys, a game in which we were on the under, and of course, it was a nerve-wracking outcome. We sweated it. Brett Maher of the Cowboys missed 4 extra points, and we thank him for that. But the totals in the 6 games, 64 points, 61, 65, 55, 41, and then finally 45 points in the Monday Nighter. Average points, 55.1 combined points per game over Wild Card Weekend. Definitely the highest scoring Wild Card Weekend of all time.
Yeah, it sure was, Victor. A lot of excitement. I know the fans are just glued to the NFL football playoffs after what was a very, very exciting regular portion of the football season. So many close call games, the most in NFL football history, one-score games this year. And in fact, if you take a look inside of the playoff preview guide newsletter this week, you'll note some outstanding stats in there about teams in one-score games. How about Kansas City this year? 0-10 against the spread in one-score football games. On the flip side, the Philadelphia Eagles were involved in the most one-score games this year. They won the most one-score games. They were 12-1-1 against the spread in those particular games. They just stuck to the opponent like glue this year, did the New York Giants, and that's one of the reasons they're in the National Football League divisional round playoffs this particular weekend. As I mentioned last week, Victor, we had an abundance of games that had same season revenge factors involved, and they involved all 6 of the road teams. And had a person just played on those revenging road teams, you would have cashed 4 of the 6 games. Not a bad little on the blind angle. This week, we've got 2 teams that are playing with same season revenge. They both also happen to be on the road again this week. That happens to be Jacksonville and the aforementioned New York Giants, who are, by the way, playing with double revenge. Philadelphia took them out 2 times this year. And this is something interesting, Victor, that I came across. There's a site that I go to. It's an NFL media site for all the media people. And it's just filled with oodles of great information. And I love to glean stuff off of that. And one of the things that I gleaned off of it was weighing these teams that are in the playoffs by their strength of schedule by wins, okay? And of the teams that are playing in the divisional round this weekend, this is how they stack up on the ladder. Win percentage, strength of schedule by wins. The weakest of all, San Francisco. Opponents 0.417. The next weakest, Kansas City, 0.453. Then comes Jacksonville, 0.467. Philadelphia, 0.474. We're getting up the ladder here. Buffalo in at 4.89. Cincinnati and Dallas both each at 0.507. And the team in the playoffs that faced the strongest strength of schedule by wins, the New York Giants, whose opponents were 0.526 win percentage-wise. I didn't put that in the preview guide magazine this year. I'm sharing it instead with our listeners here on the podcast here. I think that's pretty meaty stuff to ponder and consider when you're making your playoff selection plays this weekend. And one final thought, Victor, before we move over to our NFL game of the week. On that same site, I also happen to notice where they'll list the teams on their net touchdowns for the season. And the one common denominator for teams that lead the league in net touchdowns is they are teams that are in the playoffs, simply because they put up more points than their opponents do. And the largest amount of those points come obviously in the form of a touchdown. The team that led the league in net touchdowns this year, those are the ones scored as opposed to the ones they gave up, was the Buffalo Bills at plus 21. Then came the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles and the San Francisco Giants, all each at plus 20, followed by Cincinnati and Kansas City at plus 18. So hence, there we go. We're talking about all these teams playing on divisional weekend. And what do? They check a lot of these boxes that I'm talking about here because of their play, how exceptional it was on the playing field this year. Any other thoughts you might have, Victor, before we move on to our NFL featured game of the week this week?
Mark, 2, maybe 3 quick thoughts. First off, in regards to teasers this weekend, a lot of people are going to be playing the Wong teaser. Now, the Wong teaser is the only teaser that a sharp teaser bettor plays. The Wong teaser is a teaser that crosses over the key number of 3 and the key number of 7 in the NFL. And if you look at the Saturday schedule, there are two prime games in which a bettor may consider the Wong teaser. KC favored by 8.5 over Jacksonville, and of course Philadelphia favored by 7.5 over the Giants. So you're going to get a good amount of people on Saturday, Mark. They're going to take KC down from 8.5 down to 2.5 in a 2-team 6-point teaser, and they're going to take the Eagles down from -7.5 to -1.5. So now all they're betting is Kansas City to win by 2 or more, and Philadelphia to win by, Kansas City to win by 3 or more, and Philadelphia to win by 2 or more. I would seriously caution against that. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the two underdogs on the Saturday slate won the game outright. Expanding on that, if I can, this is a weekend in which it is a good idea to fade or go against the number 1 seeds. First off, from our database, Mark, in the last 20 years in the divisional round of the NFL playoffs, road teams who missed the playoffs the previous year have gone 26-12 ATS in the divisional round. That applies to 2 teams this week. Guess who? The Jacksonville Jaguars on Saturday, the New York Giants on Saturday as well. And one more stat, Mark, in the division round, number 1 seed favorites of 10 or less points have gone 8-24 ATS as well. Play against the 2 favorites on Saturday. So again, let me circle all the way back around and talk about that Wong teaser. If you're still going to be playing a teaser, here's the way to play it, I would suggest. Play the Chiefs and then play a Sunday game as the second part of that teaser. Play the Eagles and then play a Sunday game as the second part of that teaser. I would not tease both favorites on Saturday because, again, I would not be surprised if there's an outright dog win there, Mark.
I agree with you, Victor. I feel there is an outright dog winner on Saturday's football card. There's probably likely 2 of them on the divisional card this particular weekend, and it wouldn't surprise me, not at all, to see any of those 2 football teams win these games straight up on the scoreboard. You're tuned in to Mark Lawrence Against the Spread, the nation's most popular sports handicapping talk show. Let's hop over, Victor, now to our featured NFL Game of the Week in the divisional round before we hop out to Vegas to get the Vegas vibe from Andy Iskoe and Jim Feist complimentary play. Let's get into that NFL Game of the Week this week. And obviously, with all the games on tap this week, and they're all good games, there's no question about that. But let's take a look, Victor, if we will. Sunday night when San Francisco plays host to Dallas in what's got the making of what could have been a championship game. These 2 football teams, a lot of people felt maybe would be playing in the NFC championship game. They're meeting in the divisional round instead. How do you see these 2 teams shaking out on Sunday, Victor?
The Cowboys and the Niners. The Niners are pretty much stuck on a point spread of -3.5 in the game. And in terms of the over-under line, it opened at 46.5. It's creeped down a half a point. There's some 46s out there as we speak. There's even a couple of 45.5. So this is going to be a game that we're going to track for the remainder of the week and then make our move depending on where the line is over the weekend. On the season, let's see here, the Cowboys 8-9-1 over under, 47.5 combined points per game. In Dallas games this season, they went 5-4 over under at home, 3-5-1 over under on the road. For the Niners, despite the fact that they got, a killer defense, they still had more overs than unders this year. They went 10-8 thus far, 10 overs, 8 unders, 44.0 combined points per game in Niner games. When we track each team and their playoff over-under tendencies, on the Dallas side, since 1992, they've gone 16-12 over-under in the playoffs, a few more overs than unders, but 12-3, 75% over when the over-under line in their playoff games is 46 or less points, like this particular week. Similar numbers for the Niners. They've gone 16-13-1 OU since 1992. However, when favored, their numbers improved to 65% over the total, 13-6 OU. and including 10-3 for the Niners when favored by more than a field goal over under. So we're kind of skewing a little bit over there. Of course, these two teams played each other in the playoffs last year. The game was played in Dallas. The over-under line was 51.0. Final score, San Francisco, of course, as we know, pulled off the upset. They won 23-17. The game ended up going under by 11 points. With that said, I ran a little series history review from our database. And these two teams, when playing each other, have gone 18-7-1 over under.
Wow.
That includes 9-3 in the last 20 years. It's been a pretty high scoring series. From our Playbook NFL database in the postseason, I'm specifically targeting NFC conference games in the playoffs. And when the home team is favored in NFC conference playoff games, check out these numbers: 63 overs, only 39 unders. Again, when the home team is favored. That includes 17-5-1 over under in the last 10 years. That's 77% over when the over underline in these NFC conference games is less than 48 points. So again, we're kind of skewing over a little bit now. We're certainly aware that the Niners have this fantastic defense, and in fact, they have the best rushing defense in the playoffs thus far, as they allow only 3.4 yards per rush on the season. With that said, that also plays into another decent high-scoring pattern, and NFL playoff favorites who allow 3.7 or less yards per rush on the season. These teams have gone 18-6-1 OU when the OU line is less than 50 points. Of course, we've got that rare situation for Dallas in that they're coming off a straight-up and ATS playoff road favorite win against Tampa last Monday night. In fact, it's only occurred 15 times in the last 30 years. A team wins on the road. They cover the number as a favorite. The sample size is small, but it's significant nevertheless. It's gone 5-0-1 to the over in the last 10 years. All NFL teams off a playoff straight-up and ATS road favorite win, again, when the OU line is less than 50 points. It applies to Dallas in the game. Based on the spread and the OU line, the implied score is San Francisco 24.5, Dallas 21. Our models point to something a little bit off of those numbers, maybe a score closer to like 31-21 for the road favorite. What clinches it for me is, I always review the weekend's card with my wife the night before, Sandy. And I talked to her last night. We took a look at all 4 games in the weekend. And I asked her, give me your first impression. And I do that because I kind of want to see which way, Joe Public is leaning in the game.
I won't tell her that, Victor.
No, please don't, Mark. But her first impressions were Jags, Chiefs over, Giants, Eagles over, and then on the Sunday games, Bengals, Bills over, and finally, Cowboys, 49ers under. And I said, it's kind of ironic that you say that because right now, the only game I'm considering betting the over in is the one in which you like the under. With that said, we've got a good enough material from the database to suggest going over in the Cowboy game. But before you do, let's track the line move for a couple of days. Let's see if this line gets into the key number range of 45, maybe even a 44. Either way, we think the over is the way to go this week as they play out there in the West Coast on Sunday evening.
Victor looks over the total in this football game between the Cowboys and the 49ers. And Victor, one more quick question before I get to my analysis of the game. After you asked Sandy that question and you told her you're going the other way, did you end up having to cook your own meal last night?
No, I made sure I did it after dinner.
That was good. That was wise. Well, that was Victor's overview on the football game. A real nice analysis why he's going over the total in this football game between the 49ers and the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday. And as I prefaced before, this game has got all the makings of what could well have been a championship game in the NFC. For the Dallas Cowboys come in here, Mike McCarthy has struggled in the past as a head coach, but he's done really well as an underdog in the playoffs. Taking points 7 times, he's gone 6-2-1 against the spread in that particular role. The problem with the Dallas Cowboys is one that everybody knows, even Jerry Jones. This football team just struggles winning games on the road, which they did last week. Now, can they do it 2 games in a row on the road? The reason I ask that is if you go back to 1981, you'll see in 16 road games in the playoffs for the Dallas Cowboys, they're just 3-13 straight up with 5-point spread covers in those football games. Even worse, this is the 4th consecutive road game in a row for the Dallas Cowboys. That's a long road to have to hoe when you're playing 4 in a row on the road, and especially it ends up being in the playoffs. Teams that have done just this, when they're coming off a win like the Dallas Cowboys are, they're just 1-9 straight up and 2-7-1 against the spread in this tiring road travel row. For the San Francisco 49ers, I think their biggest question that they face this year, they may not admit it, but it has to be at the forethought, at least of Mike Shanahan and some of the coaches, is can Brock Purdy keep producing? He's done a terrific job, and there's no indication that he's not going to, but you know the law of averages, what regression is all about. We're talking about a kid who's really turned the NFL football upside down for everything that he's done for the 49ers. Can he continue to keep producing? If he does, at the level that he's played, the 49ers will be in the Super Bowl. That'll be the big key in this football game, I feel. Kyle Shanahan, the head coach, he's been spectacular in the playoffs, 6-1 against the spread in his 7 playoff games. He's a big-time moneymaker here. The biggest negative in the game that I saw for San Francisco, and I pointed this out in this week's Playbook Playoff Guide newsletter. We talked about playoff teams playing their first playoff game that are on an 11-game exact win streak. There have been 4 of them going back to 1980, and all 4 of them lost the football game to the money and straight up. 3 of them were favored, by the way. So is this 0-4 stat a hurdle for San Francisco? That remains to be seen. It's kind of an ugly stat, but the stat that I'll trump that with and tell you why I like San Francisco in this football game is because of one of the best stats I have in my database. And it's simply put because San Francisco, as we alluded to last week, is one of the football teams that lost in their championship game last year. And these teams who lose in their championship game and come back and make the playoffs the following year, and they're at home, you bring them at home coming off a straight up and ATS win in their previous game. These teams are 19-2 straight up and 18-3 against the spread. That goes all the way back to 1980, guys. That's about as powerful of a number as you'll see to an NFL playoff awesome angle. And that's what San Francisco checks the box in this particular week. That's the reason I'll be on San Francisco this week for my side on this football game. You're tuned in to Mark Lawrence Against the Spread, the nation's most popular sports handicapping talk show. And with that, let's hop out to Las Vegas now, one of our favorite segments, to get the Vegas vibe from Andy Iskoe, our good friend in Las Vegas, publisher of the Logical Approach football newsletter, one of the finest in the country. Be sure to get your hands on a copy of his Logical Approach football newsletter. It'll get your mind thinking the right way when it comes to handicapping these football games. Andy, how was everything for you in the National Football League wild card round of games last week?
Well, Mark, it was a very good weekend for the wild card round. A lot of interesting dynamics at play and some very interesting and entertaining games, but also some sloppy football in a number of them. Uncharacteristic play, for example, by Trevor Lawrence in the first half of their game against the Chargers. Josh Allen of the Bills, uncharacteristically poor, maybe one of the sloppiest games of his career. Yet both Jacksonville and Buffalo were able to overcome those difficulties, end up winning and advancing to this week's round. And then, of course, you had I don't know if it'll be the final game of Tom Brady's career, but possibly the final game of him as a Tampa Bay Buck with their loss on Monday night against the Dallas Cowboys, which brings me to a situation that I think has gotten some press attention, and that is the unfairness of the way the NFL games or playoff games are scheduled, San Francisco has a 2-day advantage in preparing for this game. San Francisco played on Saturday. Dallas played on Monday night, and then they've got to go travel to San Francisco. Now, the NFL has been tinkering with the schedule the last few years, the expanded playoff field, the super wild card weekend. And of course, they do it for money. But if they want to really keep more integrity in the game, they might still have the 6 wild card games, but why not do one of two things? Either get rid of that Monday night game and have the teams play on Saturday and Sunday, so at most there'd only be a 1-day advantage for a team that plays on Saturday against a team that plays on Sunday if they happen to meet the next week. Or, and this is maybe something the NFL would consider, maybe what you do on Championship Sunday is instead of having 1 game Sunday and 1 game Monday, both games on Sunday rather, you have 1 game on Sunday and 1 game on Monday, and the game on Monday would be between the teams that would involve the team that had the 1 less day of rest, going from say Sunday to Sunday, or Sunday to Monday, whichever the way might be. So maybe that might be a solution. And then it wouldn't matter if one team has 1 extra day of rest on the game after the championship, because the Super Bowl will be 2 weeks away and the rest factor would not be significant, that difference there. So that's it. The other thought that comes to mind is, with Buffalo advancing, how cool would it be if in their game against Cincinnati, when they come out for the pregame toss, if he's cleared medically, Damar Hamlin comes out as one of the co-captains for the day and gets involved with the coin toss. I think the Buffalo Stadium would just totally explode, would provide added energy for the Buffalo Bills, who may not need that added energy anyway, but I think that would just be a remarkable story, almost completing the cycle of the recovery from that injury that he had a couple of weeks ago.
I think that's a real possibility also, Andy, not only from a standpoint of Hamlin being healthy enough to do just that. It would also, as you mentioned, serve to be a real rousing point for the Buffalo Bills and the fans as well. Now, I'm sure the NFL would have to approve that, but if he doesn't even come out as a captain, if he just comes out in his uniform, I mean, all that matters is he's out on the field with his team, and I think that would really benefit the Buffalo Bills in that football game. Andy, before I get to your complimentary play, let me ask you this question here. Let's suppose that this week Buffalo and Kansas City each win, and they're going to face each other next week in a championship game. But that game gets moved to Atlanta, okay, because of the postponement. Who ends up on the short end of that stick of these two football teams, in your opinion, Kansas City or Buffalo, because of the reschedule?
I think it might be Kansas City, to the extent that if Buffalo had played that game against Cincinnati, you might still have had a situation where Kansas City had they ended up tied. Didn't they? They would have ended up tied if Kansas City had beaten Cincinnati, I think. I'm not sure if Kansas City had a 1-game edge.
Kansas City had the edge before the postponement, yes.
Right. So if Buffalo had won, Buffalo would have had the home field advantage because they beat Kansas City head-to-head, and they would have had identical records, I believe.
Correct.
So if that's the case, because I was going all along that if Cincinnati beat Buffalo, then Cincinnati actually had the tiebreaker. If Kansas City had lost to, I think it was who they played, Denver, I think, the last game of the season, which didn't happen, in which case Kansas City would be the deserved number 1, but we didn't have that result, and Buffalo might have won that game against Cincinnati if it had played. So I'm not sure that it really hurts either team, other than the fact that psychologically, if Kansas City were playing Buffalo at home, it might bring back memories of last year's unfortunate result where Kansas City lost to Buffalo. Now at a neutral site, they don't have that same angle working either for or against them. So I'm not necessarily sure that it favors either team, but I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Well, what would be the over-under in that game? How many times the overtime rule was changed because of that football game last year when they play? How many times would it be cut up throughout the course of that game?
I would make the line on that one. Well, it's hard to say, because if the game gets close in the fourth quarter, it'll probably be mentioned a few more times. But I'd say 2.5. I'd make the over
2.5 to start, right?
I'm talking from once the game kicks off, not the pregame introduction.
If it was a Super Bowl game, it would be a prop that we could bet on, but we unfortunately can't.
They might have an over. They've added more and more here in Vegas, and I think offshore as well. More and more props involving all playoff games, but especially the conference championship games. Nowhere's near the extent of what they will be offering for the Super Bowl, but I would think overtime might be one of the props that is offered, especially in light of the rule change that was long overdue.
We're visiting with Andy Iskoe from TheLogicalApproach.com in Las Vegas, getting an overview about what's going on in Las Vegas this NFL divisional round weekend. And Andy, before we let you hop out of here, I know our listeners would love to know what you've got on tap for your complimentary play this divisional weekend.
Well, the game you and Victor just talked about is the game that I had selected. And, of course, we don't do any pre-podcast chatting as far as what games I'm going to be looking at, because I actually like all four games this week. But I do like the Dallas-San Francisco game. You pointed out a number of reasons, especially for San Francisco. Let's also remember that it's a revenge game for Dallas, who lost at home last year to the 49ers 21-13 in their opening game last season. I'm not so sure how much that matters. I don't know that revenge means that all that much in the postseason, because if you need revenge as a motivator, that's wrong. The motivation should be, we've got a chance to win and advance another step to the Super Bowl. So I sort of discount that a little bit more than I might put it in the regular season. And even there, I'm a little bit suspect about that, because these are professionals as opposed to college kids, where you normally don't get revenge situations unless you're meeting in a conference championship game or in the national semifinals or a finals game. But I was on both of these teams last week. They both won. They were both favored. San Francisco at home, after an early struggle, got by Seattle with relative ease, and Dallas, after both teams were unable to do anything the first two possessions, Dallas took control against Tampa Bay on the road, won that game a lot easier. I thought that was a bad line in that game, but I think a lot of it may have had to do with the sportsbooks perhaps expecting money coming in on Tom Brady because it's a playoff game and his career. And as it turns out, the line really didn't move. It did move early, as we talked about last week. The game opened with Dallas a 3.5-point road favorite, and the early money flooded in, or at least enough to cause the line not to move to 3 but to 2.5 eventually, and that's pretty much where it stayed for the entirety of the game. This line, to me, a little bit more reasonable, but I do prefer the 49ers for several other reasons, fundamental and otherwise. Fundamentally, these teams statistically almost across the board are fairly even in most rushing, passing categories. Even scoring defense is very close. Scoring offense, the 49ers have trying to remember what it was there. I think it was very slight advantage, I think, maybe either for San Francisco or Dallas. I think it's San Francisco for another reason that I'll mention. Fundamentally, the one area where San Francisco does have what I consider a significant edge is in defending the run. I think Victor touched upon the fact in his totals and analysis, San Francisco rather outstanding in the NFL, allowing just 79 yards per run and 79 yards per game rushing and 3.4 yards per rush. Compare that to Dallas, which is not bad, but not in the vicinity of what San Francisco permits. The Cowboys allow 129 yards per game. Now, the difference between 129 and 79 can often be attributed to the number of plays that are run against you. One team may be facing 300 rushes a season, another team might be facing 450, but that's made up for in yards per rush, and that's where Dallas's 3.4. San Francisco's 3.4 stacks up very nicely against Dallas, which allows 4.4. And that's important because Dallas does have the edge at quarterback with Dak Prescott, certainly in terms of NFL experience, if not postseason experience. But Brock Purdy, if he had any nerves, he got them out of the way last week in that, really in that first half against Seattle. He was comfortable, but Dallas is more reliant on quarterback play to win its games than San Francisco is to win its games because of the talent that the 49ers have to surround Purdy. They're asking him not to make turnovers, not to lose the game, but to just, if they don't turn the ball over, they should win this game, maybe even comfortably. You got Christian McCaffrey, maybe one of the best midseason acquisitions in the history of the NFL. Some people would argue that maybe Herschel Walker going from Minnesota to Dallas, but when you consider what Dallas had to give up in draft choices, not nearly as good as the situation with McCaffrey coming to the 49ers. Deebo Samuel, a nice complimentary play. Kittle, the tight end, maybe the best in the game, certainly amongst the top 2 or 3 in the game right now. So they just need Purdy to be, I hate the phrase, game manager, but in effect, he just do what you do comfortably. Don't make mistakes, because you've got the league's best defense going up against Dallas, which has a pretty good offense. And when Victor made the case for the over in this game, one thing that also points me to how well San Francisco has played. Not only have they won 11 straight games, but they've scored 33 or more points in each of their last 4 games, in 6 of 7 and in 7 of 9. So they've been playing extremely well. And of course, most of those games in the certainly at the latter end of the streak, involve Brock Purdy as quarterback. So I think it's a good situation for the 49ers here, who when I looked at the overall season, I had Philadelphia and San Francisco as the top 2 teams in the NFC rather, all season long, from really let's say late September, early October, after the 49ers got healthy and made the trade. I've also had Dallas number 3 in the NFL, really from the start of the season. Remember, the Cowboys were a 12-5 team last year, winning the NFC East, and they were basically my number 3 team ahead of Minnesota all season, but there was a gap between Philadelphia, San Francisco, who I have rated 1-2 or 2-1, depending upon the aspect that you look at, and then Dallas was a decent gap behind those 2 teams. So San Francisco or Philadelphia, I've had ranked decently ahead of Dallas all season, and I'm going to stick with this game. I think the 49ers are capable of winning this game, say anywhere from 7 to 14 points. Not quite sure how high of a scoring game it will be, because I can make some cases for the defenses as well. So I'll let Victor's selection on this game rule the podcast this week. I wouldn't be surprised. See, the thing for San Francisco, they scored all those points, but they're facing a pretty good Dallas defense, and that would be the concern that I have here. At the same time, San Francisco's facing a pretty good defense as well in Dallas, because Dallas is like defense. We always talk about don't place too much emphasis on what you saw last. Well, everyone or most people who liked Tampa Bay were making the negative case against Dallas, because look how poorly they played in that season-ending regular season game against Washington. They lose 26-6. Well, the game pretty much meant nothing for Dallas, even though Philadelphia needed to win to wrap up the division because of Philadelphia's previous losses to New Orleans and Dallas, as a matter of fact. I think that was that 40-34 game. So people made the case against Dallas because of what they did against Washington at the end of the season, forgetting that it came right after or 2 weeks after that win against Philadelphia, which I think had just that one loss at the time. Because if I recall correctly, I believe the sequence was Philadelphia lost to Dallas, and then they lost to, I think, New Orleans, which was the big upset. So I think that when you consider what Dallas has done, and I give them full marks, I think this is where they meet their end this week, and I'm going with the 49ers.
Andy Iskoe on the San Francisco 49ers. He confirms our complimentary Game of the Week selection side in this football game as well. Andy riding a nice 4-1 winning streak, his last 5 on his complimentary plays on the show, on the heels of a Dallas Cowboy win last week when they went in and disposed of the Tampa Bay Bucks. Andy riding the San Francisco 49ers this week. Andy, great job on the show. As always, we really appreciate everything that you add to the show. I'm going to wish you nothing but the very best of luck this week. Let's hope the ball bounces your way as well.
Well, thanks, and best of luck to you, Victor, all the listeners and viewers. And 6 down, 4 more to go this weekend, and then we're down to the final 3 meaningful games of the NFL season. Season has flown by, and I want to savor the next few weeks.
Well, Andy, we'll catch you next week when we do our NFL Conference Championship playoff preview. I'll talk with you then, my friend.
Thank you.
That was Andy Iskoe joining us from TheLogicalApproach.com in Las Vegas with the Vegas vibe and everything that's going on. Before I get to my awesome angle of the week on the show this week and Victor's complimentary play, I'm going to guess maybe from Tuco. I don't know that for sure. I don't have any insight, but we're going to find out. Before we do that, let's find out what our good friend Jim Feist has to say from Las Vegas also as he examines this football divisional card this week with his complimentary call. Jim, take it away, if you will.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mark. And welcome to another week of great football. Last week we saw some very interesting matchups. I'd like to say it's time for Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady to move on, let the kids take over. But wait a minute, the kids are taking over. The 8 teams that are still remaining, all the quarterbacks are under 30 years old. The oldest is Dak at 29. It's about time. Now, let's get down to the game that we're going to talk about a little bit here today. It's Buffalo hosting Cincinnati. Last week, both these teams struggled and they could have easily lost. Some because of some poor coaching, and the other game with Cincinnati, they're having offensive line problems, and right now they have 3 offensive line starters either out or injured. And that is a problem. However, last year in the playoffs, Cincinnati had the same problem, but Joe Burrow and company seemed to manage to get through that and got to the Super Bowl, only losing by 3 points to the Rams. It's going to be a war there in Buffalo. But Josh Allen has been helping the opposing team quite a bit lately, turning the ball over a lot. Whether it's interceptions, whether it's fumbles, he's a great athlete. But the turnovers, the sloppiness has to stop if they're going to win or go far. I look for this game to be closer than the spread. Now, a lot of people are saying Buffalo's going to win by 7 or more because of those offensive line, and they could be right. However, this Cincinnati team has been red hot down the stretch until they ran into that juggernaut last week. They're called the Ravens with a backup quarterback. Thank you, Lamar. He didn't show up. But they run the ball so well. They're very physical. And on defense, they're tough. Buffalo doesn't have all those weapons that Baltimore has, but they have a much better quarterback. I look for this game to be high scoring, and I look for Cincinnati to cover the spread, but I would have called them to win the game if it weren't for those offensive line problems. So I'm going to go with Cincinnati Bengals here. I'm going to take the points, 5.5 or 5, what's out there right now. It could go higher, so it might be worth waiting, because as that information about the offensive line being injured gets out there, a lot of the public will bet on the Bills. At least I think that's what happens. I have my money on the Bengals to cover the spread. I would have taken them to win the game straight up on the money line, but because of those offensive line injuries, I'm just going to go with the spread. Good luck this weekend, everybody. Thank you, guys, and good luck to you.
Jim likes those Cincinnati Bengals plus the points in a rare dog roll this week for his complimentary call on the NFL Divisional Card Round playoff games. Let's move over now to our awesome angle of the week on the football card this week. We call our awesome angle, we call it the Reid rule. Reid as in R-E-I-D, as in Andy Reid, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to play on any NFL team coached by Andy Reid if they are playing with the week of rest against an opponent that won 10 or fewer games the previous season. Just simple enough. Andy Reid with rest. Opponent didn't win 10 games last season or won 10 or fewer games. In his career, he's 16-5-1 against the spread in this role. And in fact, applying a little bit of Victor's elixir magic to this particular angle, if the over-under total in those games happen to be less than 54 points, in this particular role, Andy Reid is 16-0 straight up and 15-1 against the spread, with this over-under total being what it is. So our awesome angle play this week gives us the Kansas City Chiefs over Jacksonville. And by the way, from that Playbook playoff preview guide newsletter this week, we also know that Andy Reid has won 19 playoff games, 15 of them by double-digit margins. And with that, Victor, I'm going to hand it over to you to find out what you're looking at this particular weekend on the NFL divisional card, and let our listeners know what's going on at King Krill Sports this weekend.
Sure thing, Mark. You know, we're transitioning these days. We don't touch college basketball totals too much, but we do focus a lot on the NBA and pro basketball. And since our last podcast last week, Our King Creole service has put out 6 NBA over-under selections, and we've been fortunate to go a perfect 6-0 with those plays. That's right. Our record in the NBA for the season right now stands at a documented 6-0 with over-under selections. We've got another one going on Wednesday night. We're going to have another totals play going on Thursday night in the NBA. So again, join us please for some of these NBA over-under selections. We got a really good handle on them here to start the season. It's our best start ever in the NBA. And of course, as is always the case, our NBA over-under selections are available at the playbooksports.com website. So now with that said, Mark, talking about transitioning, let's transition back to Tuco, if you will. And you know, these days, a sharp bettor or a sharp handicapper has to learn to adapt, to change, and to evolve to alternative ways of betting on sports. That's the nature of our new sports betting world these days. And I'm specifically talking about the team totals in the NFL, in which we've really cleaned up in the totals tip sheet over the last 4 years, thanks to King's best friend Tuco. And not just the team totals, but betting first quarter lines, first half lines, second half lines. There are plenty of profits to be made with some of these more exotic props or exotic wagers. And Mark mentioned Tuco a little bit earlier. We're going back to the team that did it for us last week. Once again, the Buffalo Bills. We played Buffalo thanks to Tuco to go over their team total of 28.0 points in last week's podcast. They scored 34 points against the Dolphins in that particular game. And not only that, but our King Creole seasonal clients also got a first half team total last week, as we had a 3-star play on Buffalo to score over 14.5 points in the first half of that division game against the Dolphins. They scored 14 quick points right off the bat in the first quarter, and we cashed that winner 2 minutes into the second quarter when they got a field goal. And for the second week in a row, that's where we're going. Now, hopefully, you have an online account or you have an out somewhere in Las Vegas or, again, off the internet in which you can play first half team totals. In this week's home game against Cincinnati, the OU line for Buffalo Bills first half team total is currently sitting at 13.5 points. It's showing signs of going upward, as the money line is already at minus 130 for this wager. So I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up to 14.0. With that said, Mark, we're going over again. Obviously, we would prefer that our, podcast watchers get that line of 13.5 points, but we'll advise a play even if it gets up to 14 or more for the Bills. Reason? Heck, Buffalo is ranked number 1 in the entire league for this season for most points per game scored at home in the first half of their games, at 19.8 points per game. That's Buffalo's average at home in the first half this season. There's no other way to go for an offense that's in a very, very good groove as of late. Buffalo has scored, 32, 35, 34, 34 total points in their last 4 overall. So again, Mark, we're giving the ball to Tuco. He's playing a first half team total this week, and it's Buffalo Bills to score 13.5 points over in their game against Cincinnati. That's our free play for this week. Don't forget to check out all of our over-under selections, whether it's pro basketball or whether it is NFL playoffs, again at playbooksports.com. Mark, as we wait for the new basketball newsletter to come out on Friday, what do you got planned this weekend?
Let me say this first, Victor. I got to compliment your thinking and your thought here. You mentioned the theory about adapting, changing, evolving. I love using acronyms, okay? We have a new thing we're doing at Playbook Sports called the Win Report. What's important now? Win. And it's all just facts you need to know right now, what's important here today. You mentioned adapting, changing, and evolving. That acronym is ACE, A-C-E. We're going to call that Victor's ACE theory, okay?
I like that.
And as you mentioned, evolving, so too is Tuco. Tuco really made his mark with these team totals, especially now. He's going to a first half team total. I love that. Okay. So now we've got
Thank
the
you.
Buffalo Bills over as high as 14 for Victor's complimentary play in the first half of their football game on this weekend's divisional card from Victor King. As far as I'm looking this particular weekend here, Victor, I've got my big divisional game of the year going this weekend. We're documented 13-3 in our 4-star or higher rated play since the month of November in football. This will be another 4-star play on the football card this weekend. You can check it out at playbooksports.com or give my office a call toll free at 1-800-321-7777. And while you're at it, be sure to download your copy of that Playbook Playoff Guide newsletter this weekend for everything you'll need to know about the NFL football cards this weekend. Before I sign off, one quick note from our good friends at mybookie.ag. Once again, offering up to $1,000 welcome bonus plus a free $10 casino chip when you log on at mybookie.ag and enter the promo code Playbook. That's mybookie.ag, promo code Playbook, to get your up to $1,000 welcome bonus and your free casino chip. Until next week, I want to thank Andy Iskoe from TheLogicalApproach.com, Victor King from King Creole Sports for great jobs on this show once again as always. And until then, this is Mark Lawrence reminding you to always remember to bet with your head, not over it, and good luck as always.